Good morning. We are glad that you are here. I'm grateful for your presence to be with us this morning. We welcome all of you to our worship this morning. During the time of Jesus Christ, you can read in the gospel accounts with great repetition that Jesus Christ healed them all. Many came and all were healed. Disease, as you would have known it, in the region of Israel was essentially eradicated. Thousands of people were healed. Jesus Christ is Israel's physician. He is their doctor in a physical way so that they would get that He is their doctor in a spiritual way. All those evidences there in front of the people demonstrate His power and purpose, being the one sent by God to cure. And not only that, but Hebrews chapter 2, as David read this morning, this idea of Him coming to share in our flesh. Something unique just to human beings until God became man. And when God became man, flesh took on a different meaning. Because there was some way, even though there was creative power, there was not association. There was not a complete or a completed way for Christ to relate to us from our position. And now we have this merciful high priest who has experienced life in the flesh. It really is a picture-perfect scenario. Only God could have orchestrated and put all of this into motion. So Jesus comes in the flesh, and He deals with people who are just like Him in the flesh. And He deals with lots of people in the flesh who are sick in their flesh. And He heals them. There's perhaps no other time in history where Israel literally is at its healthiest because there was a doctor on the scene. John said that the books literally would not be able to be written if everything that Jesus did had been recorded. I want us to look at one of those instances together in Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1. Verse 40. A man with leprosy came to Him. and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and he touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately, the leprosy left him and he was cured. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go rather and show yourself to the priest. Offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony against them. Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news, and as a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in the lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. Here was a man, I believe it's Matthew's account. Matthew says that the man was covered with leprosy. Not just a little, not just a touch, not just at its infancy, but at the height of the disease, where it had spread across his body, where it was visibly distracting. You have met or encountered people like that before, where it is difficult because a person is maybe so covered with something. It's difficult even to look that person kind of in the face. Have you ever done that? You know, because your eyes are just naturally drawn to whatever it is on their face or on their arm, and it's hard not to look at that thing because we've been so trained not to, but it's still difficult. Now, this is a man that was covered in leprosy. Covered. He is not supposed to be in this group of people. There's a crowd always following along with Christ. This leper has no business there. He is violating all the rules associated with the law in order to be there. Because a leper is quarantined. You know that about a leper. He's not someone that is capable of showing up to Sunday services and eating with the family. He is sent away. He's not part, not because they don't love him, not because he has necessarily done something, but because leprosy is highly contagious. And it spreads within a family. And so even if a very loving father happened to come down with leprosy, he would have been isolated away from humanity. That's why you see in another place, I think it's 17th chapter of Luke, 10 lepers that stood at a distance and cried out, "Heal us, Jesus." And he does, of course. But they couldn't approach. They couldn't do that. He begs. He gets down on his knees and puts his face, the Bible says, to the ground. When a man comes to Christ, gets on his knees and puts his face to the ground, you can be reasonably assured of a few things. When you see that man falling to his knees and bowing down in front of Christ, you can be rest assured that that is a sign of humility. It's a sign that he was being, in every way possible, as submissive to Christ as he could be. I don't know if this man is full of faith or not. The text really doesn't indicate so. He calls him Lord, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he fully believed that in his heart. Jesus healed thousands of people who didn't believe necessarily in who Jesus was. They believed what he could do, but not necessarily who he was. But this man comes and he throws himself at Jesus' feet. There is humility here. There is also further sincerity. Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. He's trusting, leaving the decision fully in the hands of Christ himself. And then there is this, verse 41. Here we find the reason why this man is healed. It's not because he necessarily has amazing faith, even though he might. But here's the reason. Filled with compassion. Filled with compassion. If you want to know why Jesus healed this particular man on this particular day, here's your reason. He is covered in a disease that has separated him from society, from his family, from his children. I don't know how old the man was, possibly from his grandchildren. Maybe he has never met his daughter-in-law. He is separated. There's no closeness there. There's no hugging at Christmas. There's no sharing a meal at Thanksgiving. Nobody's mailing cards, sending care packages out to where the lepers live. They are cut off from society. They are rejected among those who are normal, among those who are not sick. Jesus Christ has compassion. From out of that compassion, look what he does. Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand. His own flesh. His own flesh. He reaches out and he touches this man. I can guarantee you, nobody that has touched this man in recent wanted to. Nobody. If a physician may have laid hands on him, if somebody may have laid hands on him, it was not because they wanted to, but out of compassion. Jesus Christ wants to lay his hands on this man. Interesting, of course, that Jesus could have just mentally swept the disease away. He could have spoken the disease out of existence. But instead, he takes his hand and he touches this man. And he looks at him and he says, I am willing. Be clean. And immediately, this man is cleansed of his leprosy. Disease is a direct result of sin. It's what happened to man in the garden. Disease is a consequence. It's not always a direct consequence of like somebody's sin. Okay, if I get sick tomorrow, it's not always a direct consequence, although even today I feel certain that it can still be used that way. But it doesn't necessarily always equate in every situation. Job was touched from the top of his head to the soles of his feet with what was a physical disease. That physical disease is ultimately a result of sin that happened in the garden. But on that particular day when that happened to Job, it wasn't because Job had necessarily sinned himself. Okay? So disease is a visual of what sin looks like. It is a physical manifestation of something that is going on in the spiritual, in reality. This man was sick. And if this man did not get cured of this leprosy, he would have had a slow death by leprosy. There wasn't a cure. Luke's a physician, and he doesn't say, yeah, I got 48 lepers clean during my period as a doctor. He doesn't say that. There's not a cure for this. You get leprosy, you stay a leper. You get leprosy, you're separated. You're cut off. Jesus heals this leprosy. It is a physical demonstration of Christ over the power that seemed, look, you can visibly see that the man is sick himself. And because that visibility is all over his body, he is pressed to the conclusion that he is incurable. Up to this point, he has been unable to be cured by anybody or anything that he's tried in times past. He was, when he started as a leper, now he is still a leper. However long that's been, it is still the same. And it is not going to change. It's not going to be different for this guy. Tomorrow, it'll be the wake up, same routine. But Jesus sees his visible condition. Jesus sees that the man is incurable. And because he is incurable, his prognosis is unchangeable. See, Christ sees that. That's exactly what Jesus did for us with respect to our sin. He saw visible demonstration. The pain and the sorrow, the consequences that we experience in our life because of sin. He sees us. You ever seen somebody that was almost drowning? Anybody ever seen that? It's horrible, okay? I don't like it. I served as a lifeguard for a couple of years when I was a kid. I had one lady that sincerely had me at the edge because she physically could not elevate her head above the water. Now that's a helpless moment. I stood at the edge and I was looking at her, wanting to jump in, which is the last thing that you're supposed to do, but wanting to jump in to help her, and she is coming up, but her mouth is not coming up above the level of the water. That kind of situation is frantic. And when you see somebody like that, immediately there is something in here and in here that goes out to that person. When Jesus Christ sees our sin, he sees our disease, it is visible to him. He sees us and says, wow, look at those sick people. He doesn't spit on us. Instead, he says, I see that they are incurable. And because they are incurable, they are unchanged in their future. Unless I intercede. He reached out his hands. Why? Why did he reach out his hands and do to this visibly sinful, unchangeable, incurable circumstance? Why did he reach out his hands for us? Verse 41, filled with compassion. See, that's what Christ did for you. A moment ago, as we gathered around this table is generated filled with compassion. He was filled with compassion. Now just think of how powerful sin can be. There are many who are covered with greed, who are covered head to toe with lust, who have an incurable disease of selfishness, who have an unchangeable hate, and a pride that's running a fever inside their body. They are stuck in sexual sin, drunkenness, things that are vile against God. But Jesus Christ is filled with compassion. You cannot paint on a man's skin any sin to make him so diseased that the physician's hands cannot cure. Isn't that marvelous? Jesus Christ is the spiritual healer. And even today, He is still just as powerful in healing a man's spiritual condition. He is willing to touch your life. He is willing. And that's good news. And that's news that we need to be sharing with our community. But beyond that, let me just end with this thought. If it is true, and it is, that this is a representation, a picture, if you will, of what happens to a man when he has sin that is overcoming in his life, and he's filled up, and he's got all this bad stuff going. If Christ can handle a man covered head to toe with sin, whatever it is, if Christ can handle a man like that when he originally comes to him, how much more can he handle those of us? Who allow moments of sin in our own life. How much more by the Spirit's power are we able to be clean and cleansed from ways of sin that crop up in our life? And that's why Paul said in Romans 8, he said, put these things to death that are in you that belong to that old man, that diseased, sick-bodied, sick-minded person. Put that thing to death. You serve the healer. You can be touched by hands that bring wholeness. You can be led by a spirit that strengthens us to do the right thing. Praise God for that. I tell you, Jesus Christ is the healer of our community. And that's a message we need to be telling people. But He is also our healer. This is just one example. What about you? Do you feel like you're incurable? Do you feel like your future is not going to change? I suggest to you that the hands of the healer can change your future. Consider this. Jesus told this leper who lived in the outskirts of town. Don't go and say anything about it. The leper was on the outskirts of town, and Jesus was free to go wherever He wanted. But one man pointed out, beautifully so, that they kind of swapped places here at the end. Because then the leper, upon being cleansed, went in all these cities and was telling about what Jesus did. And subsequently, Jesus had to be removed to the outside areas. What another further picture of the extent to which Christ gives a new life. Why would you deny that beautiful grace? If you need to respond, the invitation is open. And we'll accept that, and God will welcome you. If you need to come, you can come as together we stand and sing this song.